Do you really believe in hell? Your life will show it. Hey everyone, welcome back to Biblical Wisdom, where we go beyond surface level faith to dig into what the Bible really teaches. Today's question is powerful and a bit uncomfortable. Do you really believe in hell? Because if you do, your life should reflect it. Let's talk about what that means and how we can live in light of eternity. What you truly believe will always influence how you live. It's one thing to say you believe in hell, but it's something entirely different for that belief to shape your everyday choices, values, and priorities. In the Bible, James 2:17 tells us, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. That verse doesn't mean we're saved by works, but it does mean real faith always produces visible fruit. If you truly believe in the eternal consequences of rejecting God, if you believe in the reality of hell, your life will reflect that urgency and awareness. Believing in hell means you no longer see life as just a series of personal achievements, pleasures, or goals. It reframes everything. You begin to see the spiritual stakes behind the people you interact with, the decisions you make, and the values you pursue. You stop living casually because you understand that time is short and eternity is long. This isn't about paranoia or being morbid. It's about having a deep conviction that every human being has an eternal destiny, and your time here is a vapor compared to what's to come. When you believe in hell, you will prioritize holiness over comfort. You'll care more about your soul than your image, your relationship with God over your status with people. Sin won't look attractive when you remember its consequences. You'll fight temptation harder, not because you're trying to earn salvation, but because you genuinely believe there's something at stake. You won't treat rebellion lightly. You won't rationalize habitual sin. You'll start to live with a soberness and a vigilance that reflects what you know is real. And it doesn't just affect your personal life. It changes how you relate to others. If you believe that the people around you are heading toward either eternal joy or eternal separation from God, you'll think differently about your conversations, your prayers, and your witness. You'll become more intentional. That random coworker, the friend you grew up with, the family member who doesn't know Jesus, they won't just be names anymore. They'll become burdens on your heart. You'll feel a godly weight to love them enough to speak truth, pray earnestly, and represent Christ well. It also changes how you handle rejection. If someone mocks your faith or avoids deep conversations, you won't be crushed. You won't give up. Because you're not sharing out of obligation. You're moved by eternal concern. You'll keep praying. You'll keep planting seeds. Because you know that time is short and eternity matters more than momentary approval. This belief also changes how you use your resources. If you believe in eternal destinies, you won't hoard your time, money, or talents just for yourself. You'll invest in the kingdom. You'll support missions. You'll be generous, sacrificial even, because you know what's at stake. You'll want to see people reached. You'll want the gospel to go out. Your priorities will shift from comfort to calling, from earthly gain to eternal impact. When you believe in hell, worship becomes more than a song, and church becomes more than a habit. It becomes a mission hub. You show up not just to be fed, but to be equipped. You stop consuming Christianity and start living it. You realize that your life is not your own, and your days are not promised. You live with purpose, with direction, with passion, because you know that eternity is real and that belief has consequences. Ultimately, Your belief in hell won't just change what you think. It will change how you speak, how you love, how you plan, how you fight sin, and how you prioritize your life. The evidence of that belief will be seen not in your words alone, but in the seriousness, urgency, and love with which you live. Jesus talked about hell more than anyone else in the Bible. That fact alone should make us pause and consider how seriously we take the subject. Hell was not a side topic or a scare tactic for Jesus. It was a central warning in his teachings, because he understood the eternal consequences of sin and separation from God. If we claim to follow Jesus but ignore or downplay what he emphasized, we are not truly following him. His words weren't vague or symbolic when he spoke about hell. They were direct, sobering, and meant to awaken the human heart to spiritual reality. In Matthew 10:28, Jesus said, "Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell." That's not a metaphor. Jesus is making a clear distinction between earthly fears and eternal ones. He's saying that while we worry about temporary dangers, there's something far greater to be concerned about: the state of our souls. That kind of statement shows us how Jesus viewed hell, not as a distant idea, but as a real place with real consequences for real people. In the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, found in Luke 16, Jesus tells of a rich man who lived in luxury while ignoring the poor beggar at his gate. When both men die, Lazarus is comforted in paradise, while the rich man ends up in torment. The rich man begs for relief, but it's too late. Jesus uses this story not just to talk about wealth and compassion, but to clearly show the irreversible nature of judgment and the reality of hell. The rich man is fully conscious, in anguish, and aware of the consequences of his life choices. Jesus didn't tell that story for dramatic effect. He told it because it reflected truth. In Matthew 25:41, Jesus speaks of the final judgment and says, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels." That statement wasn't aimed at notorious criminals, but at people who failed to live out genuine faith through acts of compassion and obedience. He emphasized that hell is not just for demons. It is a destination for those who reject the will and ways of God. This verse also shows that hell is not arbitrary. It was prepared for evil. It's not God's desire for anyone to go there. But when people align themselves with sin and rebellion, they face the same consequence. Jesus also described hell using words like outer darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth, and unquenchable fire. These aren't vague images. They are consistent and powerful symbols of anguish, isolation, and regret. They show that hell is not merely the absence of God, but the presence of judgment. It's not a place of partying or indifference. It's a place of loss, sorrow, and final separation. And Jesus repeatedly warned people about it, not because he delighted in fear, but because he loved enough to speak the truth. If Jesus emphasized hell this much, why do so many Christians avoid talking about it? The answer is often fear. Fear of offending others, fear of sounding judgmental, or fear of being unpopular. But if we believe Jesus is Lord, we cannot ignore what he taught. To believe in Jesus is to believe in everything he said, and that includes his urgent warnings about hell. He didn't soften the message to gain followers. He told the truth, even when it cost him popularity. Ignoring the reality of hell weakens the gospel message. If there's no real danger, there's no real need for salvation. If there's no eternal consequence for sin, then the cross becomes less meaningful. But Jesus didn't die to save us from mild inconvenience. He died to save us from the wrath of God, from eternal separation, from hell itself. The seriousness with which Jesus spoke about hell shows the depth of love he has for humanity. He came to seek and save the lost because he knew what they were being saved from. To follow Jesus is to take his words seriously. And if he believed hell was real enough to warn others constantly, then we must believe it too. It's not enough to admire Jesus' kindness and ignore his warnings. His love was expressed through both grace and truth. He didn't just heal and forgive. He also warned and confronted. That's what real love does. If we claim to follow Christ, we must echo his urgency, reflect his truth, and never downplay what he made clear. Hell is real, and Jesus talked about it so we could avoid it. When someone truly believes in the reality of hell, their priorities begin to shift in noticeable and lasting ways. Life is no longer centered around temporary achievements or shallow pleasures. Instead, eternal matters take center stage. The reality that people face, either everlasting life or eternal separation from God, becomes more than a theological concept. It becomes the framework through which decisions, values, and relationships are evaluated. Belief in hell transforms how a person spends time, invests resources, treats others, and approaches their personal calling. Romans 9:83 gives us an intense glimpse into this kind of mindset. Paul says, "For I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers." That's not exaggeration. It is the heart of someone who is deeply aware of eternal consequences and whose love for others runs deeper than personal comfort or safety. Paul was not merely motivated by duty. He was driven by the knowledge that people's souls were on the line. That kind of priority shift doesn't come from religion. It comes from real belief in what Jesus taught about judgment and eternity. A person who understands hell is real will not live for superficial success. They won't find fulfillment in just making money, being liked, or climbing social ladders. Those things fade. The value system changes when you know that every soul you meet is heading toward either heaven or hell. You begin to care less about temporary recognition and more about eternal impact. Even small, quiet acts of obedience, praying for someone, sharing truth in love, giving sacrificially, become deeply meaningful because they are connected to an eternal purpose. Believing in hell also strips away the illusion that time is unlimited. People who embrace this truth tend to live with urgency. They make time for the things that matter most. They don't put off spiritual conversations or keep waiting for the perfect moment to reach out to a loved one. They understand that eternity could begin for anyone at any moment. This belief also fosters perseverance. When it feels hard to keep doing the right thing, when serving others gets tiring, when rejection makes you question your efforts, belief in eternity gives strength. It reminds you that this world is not the finish line. It reminds you that faithfulness now matters forever. This shift in priorities can also be seen in how believers respond to sin in their own lives. When hell is just a vague idea, sin seems small or tolerable. But when hell is understood as a just and real destination for rebellion against God, sin becomes serious. Believers start to take holiness seriously, not out of fear, but out of reverence. They no longer try to get away with as much as possible without crossing a line. Instead, they begin asking how close they can walk with God, how much they can honor Him in their thoughts, actions, and decisions. Even relationships are affected. Belief in hell compels people to forgive, to speak truth, to love sacrificially, and to pray consistently. It fuels a burden for others, especially those who do not know Christ. Family members, friends, co-workers, and strangers are no longer just people you pass by. They become eternal beings with infinite value. The believer's heart aches for them to know the gospel. They begin to live on mission, even in ordinary moments, because they know that love without truth is incomplete. Believing in hell doesn't make a person harsh or judgmental. In fact, it makes them more compassionate. It softens the heart. It creates humility. There's no room for pride when you know what you've been saved from. Gratitude replaces arrogance, and love replaces indifference. Priorities realign not because of fear, but because of truth. When someone's eyes are open to the weight of eternity, trivial things lose their power. The person starts to spend their life differently, speak differently, and dream differently. Ultimately, believing in the reality of hell causes a person to reorient their entire life around the gospel. The mission of Christ becomes the mission of their heart. What used to be important fades, and what used to be ignored becomes essential. This is not about living in fear. It's about living with purpose, clarity, and conviction. Real belief in hell makes heaven more urgent, the gospel more beautiful, and life more intentional. Belief in hell is often misunderstood as something that leads to fear, harshness, or judgmental attitudes. But the opposite is true when that belief is rooted in the love of Christ. When someone genuinely believes in the reality of hell, it doesn't make them hateful or arrogant. It makes them broken-hearted, compassionate, and deeply concerned for others. The truth about hell should not cause believers to condemn others with pride, but to love them with urgency and humility. Real belief in hell is not driven by a desire to scare people into religion, but by a sincere desire to rescue them from eternal separation from God. The 3:6 says, But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet to warn the people, and the sword comes and takes someone's life, that person's life will be taken because of their sin. But I will hold the watchmen accountable for their blood. This verse shows that knowing the danger and remaining silent is an act of betrayal. When a person truly understands what hell is and what it means, love will compel them to speak, to act, and to care enough to warn others. Silence in the face of such a truth is not kindness. It is negligence. Belief in hell motivates prayer, outreach, and compassion. It drives the believer to their knees in intercession, not with a sense of superiority, but with a burden for the lost. It causes tears for souls, not arguments about doctrine. The gospel becomes more urgent when the stakes are eternal. This belief fuels missions, evangelism, and sacrificial living. It causes believers to cross social, cultural, and personal barriers to share the truth, because love cannot remain passive when eternity is on the line. When someone believes in hell, they do not rejoice in the idea of others going there. Instead, they are humbled by the mercy they have received and desperate for others to find that same mercy. Their tone softens, their patience grows, and their willingness to endure discomfort increases. They understand that winning a soul is more important than winning an argument. They live with an open heart, ready to extend grace and truth in equal measure. Believing in hell also reshapes how believers view enemies or difficult people. Instead of harboring bitterness or hatred, they begin to see those individuals as souls in need of salvation. The natural human reaction is to retaliate or avoid, but a heart that understands eternity will forgive, reach out, and show kindness even to those who oppose them. Hell is not a weapon to be used against others. It is a reality that makes love more urgent and necessary. This kind of belief also influences parenting, friendships, and leadership. Parents who believe in hell will not merely try to raise good children, but godly ones. They will prioritize spiritual conversations over worldly achievements. They will pray for their children's hearts more than their future careers. Friends will lovingly challenge each other, pointing one another toward Christ instead of enabling sin. Leaders in the church will not entertain, but equip, not flatter but speak truth with gentleness. Real belief in hell doesn't just change how we see others. It also deepens our gratitude toward God. The cross becomes more precious when we understand what Jesus saved us from. Worship becomes more heartfelt, not just because of what God has done, but because of what He has spared us from. The love of God is magnified when we understand the cost of ignoring that love. Jesus spoke of hell not to burden us with fear, but to awaken us to grace. In a world that avoids uncomfortable truths, belief in hell may seem extreme or outdated. But the Bible is clear, and Jesus emphasized it repeatedly. This belief, however, must always be paired with love. Truth without love becomes harsh, but love without truth becomes hollow. Belief in hell, when rightly understood, is a call to deeper compassion, greater boldness, and sincere humility. It does not cause the believer to run from people, but toward them. It does not foster pride, but brokenness. It leads not to fear-driven religion, but to love-driven mission. The goal is not to terrify, but to testify, to tell a hurting world that there is hope, forgiveness, and salvation in Jesus Christ,